I'm here today with Becca Ehrlich. Becca is an ordained pastor in the ELCA and a doctoral student with a focus on Christian spirituality. A Christian minimalist in a consumer society, she got rid of 60% of her personal possessions in 6 months, took part in a year-long shopping fast, and moved into a smaller home. She lives in Philadelphia with her husband, Will. Becca has been a longtime subscriber to Writing for Your Life, and now she's releasing her first book titled Christian Minimalism, Simple Steps for Abundant Living, which will be available May 17th from Morehouse Publishing. So Becca, so much congratulations.
Thank you. It really is surreal that I'm talking to you right now because I've been a long time follower of Writing for Your Life. So this is really great.
Well, I was just so thankful that it had been helpful for you. I mean, I threw out all these resources and emails and everything else, and you never know exactly, how many people are paying attention to it.
Yeah, well, I was, and now I have a book because of it. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's just thrilling, and it's a great book, and it's kind of unique. I mean, whenever publishing houses, want you to put a book proposal together, they ask you for comps, right? Comparable books. So were you able to find much about?
That's a great question, because when I got to that section for the book proposal, I was like, there really isn't anything. I mean, there's stuff that's related. And so I ended up just using minimalism books or Jen Hatmaker 7, which is a similar concept, but doesn't really connect to the minimalism movement specifically. So I mostly did those kind of books, but there really isn't anything out there that's like this book.
Well, I hope it hits, a nerve with folks and, allows you to take advantage of, kind of an open space in the market, which is really great. But before we talk more about the book, let me hear more about your background. You're obviously a pastor, but, kind of tell us what your journey's been like.
Yeah. So I actually grew up in an interfaith household. So my dad is Jewish and my mom is Roman Catholic and I'm Lutheran. So it's an interfaith ecumenical experience whenever we get together, which is really fun. And I feel like that sort of informs what I do as a pastor in my writing, because I don't necessarily come at it from a standpoint of being a cradle, whatever, and at the same time, having the experience of a wider and broader audience and people in general.
Interesting. So when did you get when were you ordained?
Yeah, so I was ordained in 2012. So we're coming up in almost 10 years, which is crazy and wonderful. And God is amazing. That was a fun process because I was Roman Catholic at the time. And obviously that's not a thing that's open to female Roman Catholics. And so I really thought God had the wrong number for a little bit. But God didn't. And so here I am, and I'm a Lutheran pastor, and I'm writing and doing the pastor thing and having a good old time.
And you serve a church in Philadelphia?
I don't. So I actually work in a bishop's office. Well, actually 2 bishops' offices currently, one in Altoona and one in upstate New York.
Okay.
Yeah. So currently I work with 2 bishops. There are bishop selections coming up, though, this spring. So we'll see what happens with all that and what God does.
Okay. Interesting. Well, that's got to be a different, slant on the world too, being in that kind of a role. So
it is. It's a wider, broader scope because I'm working with hundreds of congregations as opposed to being in one specific one.
Sure.
So, yeah. So it's you definitely get a broader sense of what's happening in the church in that way.
So how did you get involved in the whole minimalist world?
So I watched Netflix and my life changed.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm chronically ill. I have a chronic illness, and so I was having a bad health day, and I was just playing around on Netflix, and I watch a lot of documentaries because I'm a nerd, and it popped up with the original minimalism documentary by the minimalists, and I had no idea what minimalism was, and I was like, well, if it's bad, it's only an hour and 15 minutes of my life, so why not? So I watched it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I should be doing. And my husband Will came home, and I was like, oh my gosh, you have to watch this documentary, and he's like, he was not into it, but he watched it, and at the end, we were both like, I think God is really calling us to live a more minimalist lifestyle. And it was funny because the second time I watched it, I really noticed that they kept talking about meaning. People are looking for meaning in their lives. And so I was like, well, Jesus. But also, we know Christians have a different sense of what meaning means in life. And so I was like, well, a lot of this minimalism message is connected to the gospel of Jesus. Like Jesus lived as a minimalist, and he taught, life doesn't consist in the abundance of possessions. And there's got to be people connecting this to the Christian faith in a deep way. And at the time, this was the end of 2017, no one really was. There were, there was an article here and there, or a blog post, maybe a YouTube video here and there, but no one was really delving deeply into it. And I was like, well, I can't be the only one that wants to connect this idea of minimalism and focusing on what matters most and getting rid of everything else, and connecting that to Jesus's teachings in the Christian faith and spirituality. So I started a blog thinking like it would be, 5 of my close friends and their cats. And it ended up like people were really interested, and ended up thousands of people have connected through the social media and the blog. And it's just amazing. And it's really cool because I really think this is the type of life Jesus is truly calling us to live.
Yeah, you're right in that, he was a role model for that. But what made you decide to turn it into a book?
Well, I knew when I started the blog, I wanted to keep writing about it. And then people kept asking me about a book. They were like, when's a book coming out? And I'm like, well, I'd like to do that at some point, but I'd like to write more about it and do more research first. So I ended up writing on the blog about a year and a half, 2 years. And I was like, I think it might be time to pursue this book. And it took a long time before people were interested in the book. I'll say that traditional publishing is not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of rejection.
Exactly.
But I'm really thrilled that I found a home at Church Publishing and the Morehouse imprint, of course. And so, they believed in it, thought it was a good message. And so far it looks like people are really interested in the book, which is great.
That's wonderful. That's really wonderful to hear. And I mean, Church Publishing folks are great. I mean, they really have been putting out some fantastic books. So I'm glad that you were able to get in there.
Yeah. And what's really great is they are very intentional about making sure that there are other books that sort of are companions to each other that come out around the same time. So there was one that came out in March called Contemplative Knitting through Church Publishing. And they were like, your book and their book are like companion books. They have a lot of similar patterns and themes. So I think that's really cool too.
It really is. I mean, and that's one of the things that struck me about this whole industry is that it's so much different competitively than any place I've ever been, where, I mean, you never try to collaborate with the people that, are your closest competitors, so to speak. Whereas here, it's like, well, if they're going to buy this person's book, they're probably going to buy this person's book too. So it's not a competitive environment, and the opportunity and the motivation for authors to collaborate and cooperate more is just so much higher.
Yeah, and I've seen that a lot, especially with the Church Publishing authors who I've only met through the internet. I've never met them in person, obviously, because I went through the publishing process in the middle of a pandemic as well. But we're all scattered around the country, and we're all super supportive of each other. Which is really great. And we promote each other's books on social media. And so it's kind of cool to have like this writers club, if you will, at the same publishing house.
Absolutely. No, I think that's great. And, it's a win-win kind of a thing. So
definitely.
So there's been this thing called a decluttering movement, right? How does that relate to minimalism?
Yeah, so it's one little aspect of minimalism, I would say. So the decluttering movement tends to focus solely on getting rid of things and stuff and material possessions, which is not a bad thing. And it can be a part of the minimalism journey, but it's not the only part. You're also minimizing and decluttering your full life and changing your worldview and living more intentionally. And so the decluttering movement is great in the sense of it shows us that there are some things we need to get rid of in our lives. It starts that process, but it doesn't end there. There's other things we need to do to make sure that we're really simplifying and changing the way we live.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned too, there's a strong connection between minimalism and Christianity, mm-hmm. right? So how, within your book, how do you tie those two together?
Yeah, I use a lot of scripture, obviously, because it's funny, once you start thinking from a minimalist perspective and you start reading scripture, you're like, oh my gosh, it's everywhere. It's in scripture all the time, which is a really fun experience because you're like, Jesus really said that.
What a concept.
Yeah, like Jesus told this rich guy to like go sell all his stuff and follow him. You're like, what?
It couldn't be more obvious, could it?
Right. And obviously not everyone's called to sell all their stuff and have all that you own in a suitcase, obviously. But more to the point, Jesus was pointing out, like, that's not the point of our life. Like if that has become the focal point of our lives, like that, we really need to take what the excess in our lives and pare it down and really focus on what matters most, which is Jesus in that story, of course. But yeah, so that's one of the ways I do that. Also the concept of where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It really drives what I write about and my minimalism journey, just knowing that I'm trying not to put my heart in those things that are, temporal, as far as like material possessions or fame or worldly accolades or, all the stuff that consumer culture tells us is the point of life, but we know isn't because Jesus tells us so.
Really, really. So as you kind of made the transition into a minimalist lifestyle, it sounds like you kind of experimented with different things. Can you talk about, I'm sure that must have been fun and challenging, probably both at various points in time.
Yes, both those things. So the very first big experiment I did was a year of no shopping in 2018. And so that was really interesting. I had a list put together already for the things I was allowed to buy, like food, because I need to live, and medicine and toiletries, but only when I ran out. And I was allowed to replace something as long as it, like if it broke or, wore out or something, as long as I got rid of the original. So things like that. Obviously books, I was allowed to buy books because I'd been doing my doctorate. So I had to be able to buy books. But honestly, it wasn't as difficult as I thought it was going to be, which sounds crazy. But it really helped me be more aware of how I'm using the resources God has given me, my time, my energy, my monetary resources. And it really helped me break those buying and consuming habits and spending habits that weren't serving me well. Because at the time I was really addicted to online shopping. It really is a thing. Like it's so easy because you get a rush when you hit the button, and then you get a rush when it comes in the mail, and then 3 days later the rush is gone and you're like, and something else. It really is a thing. And so I really knew I needed to do something pretty drastic to get myself out of that vicious cycle. And so that's how I ended up doing the year of no shopping. I only ended up buying something once that was not on the list, and that's because we moved to Philadelphia. And our house is 3 floors because there's not a lot of room to build out here. You build up.
Yeah.
And I was having a hard time carrying my laundry up 3 flights of stairs. So I bought a $10 laundry backpack.
Well, I can see where, that's got to be an exception that's valid. So.
Right. That was the only thing the whole year that wasn't on my list I ended up buying, which is pretty amazing. We think we need a lot more than we actually need. Like the toiletries, even just for example, like, I don't know if you're like this or you know people who are like this, but like I have, like 5 sticks of deodorant sitting around waiting to be used. And like, I only used a few sticks of deodorant over the course of the year. I didn't even use the 5 sticks. So it's like, we stockpile all this stuff thinking we need it. And in reality, we really don't. And it's just keeping up space in our life and in our physical space.
So how has all this affected your spiritual life?
Yeah. So I definitely have more time and energy to focus on God. Because it was amazing how much time I spent shopping online. It's crazy to think about that. And energy and resources. And so I have all that now to put towards my relationship with God, which is great. I also have more space to listen for God, which sounds kind of weird, but like I have more mental and physical space for that. In a way that I didn't have before, just because I've made room for that in my life. Very
cool. That says a lot right there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And a lot, from a value perspective.
Yep, exactly. It really is. That's really what this is. It's a shifting of values and worldview.
Yes. Priorities, values, that's very cool. So another kind of, random thing that occurred is that you were part of a television show. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, so while I was in process of trying to get the book published, and I'd sort of taken a break because I had dealt with a lot of rejection, honestly, I was like, well, I don't know, I'll take a break and then revisit it in a little bit. This opportunity presented itself where I could go on a 3-week retreat to Costa Rica and kind of deal with some personal things that I've been going on in my own life. And I was like, well, I mean, I like retreats. Retreats are great. Yay, God. And God and I had been my spiritual life had not been as great as I had wanted it to be at the time. It had been better once I started the minimalism journey, but I had some trauma in my life that was getting in the way of being able to really focus on God. And so I said yes. And I went on this retreat that was filmed 24/7.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it aired on TV and now it's on streaming on HBO Max. And so it's called Lost Resort, if anyone wants to check it out. It was definitely an adventure for sure.
That had to be like an amazing experience.
Yeah, it was really cool. We did some really cool ceremonies and indigenous culture practices. And there's a lot of commonalities with a lot of the liturgy and practices in Christian spirituality. And so I was the nerd that was like, oh, this is sort of like what we do at baptism. And people are like, okay. Okay, pastor, but I met some really great people and it was a wonderful experience.
Well, it's a great thing to have said that you've done in your life, I guess, right? One time at least for.
Yeah, it's just still weird to be like, I went on this retreat that was filmed and like people saw it. I don't know. It's just a weird feeling. And like, I still get people on social media once in a while who message me and they're like, I just watched the show. Thank you so much. And I'm like, you're welcome. I just went and did my stuff. Like I didn't do anything, but I'm glad you enjoyed it.
So we're recording this on May 7th and your book comes out on May 17th, right? So you've been in the throes of the whole book launch. How is that going?
Yeah, it's good. I knew some of the stuff that was around book launch, but I don't think I fully comprehended what happens when you launch a book, since this is my first book. But it's been really great. I get to have cool conversations with people like you and really talk about Christian minimalism and get the message out there.
Good. Well, I'm glad it's been going well. It hasn't been too overwhelming or,
not yet
for you.
It has time to be overwhelming, but it's been good. No, it's actually been pretty well paced for me. Obviously it's been ramping up more and more as the book's about to come out, but it hasn't been overwhelming. Sure.
And I know this is kind of a tough question since you're in the middle of book 1, but do you have any ideas for book 2?
I do.
Talk about it. I mean, don't feel pressured to, talk about anything that's premature or whatever.
No. I've actually been really thinking about this a lot lately, and I want to do something around spiritual practices because that's sort of my jam. That's what I'm getting my doctorate in. I actually graduate 4 days after my book launch.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah, which is really cool. So I want to put that to good use. But yeah, I want to do something around spirituality and spiritual practices in the future.
Very nice. Well, please keep us posted. I'm always thrilled when there's Writing for Your Life alum, that come out with new books. So please stay in touch and keep us posted on, your future books.
I will. And thank you for all that you do, because this book exists mostly because of the work that you do. So thank you.
Well, I don't deserve that much credit, I know, but thank you. I'm glad it was helpful.